So I played Destiny 2 for the first time for a full week, 6 years after its release. And here are my thoughts. Ever since I got my first computer back in 1991, I was always drawn to sci-fi FPS games such as Doom, Quake, Half-Life, or System Shock, but I also loved to take a chill pill and play some RPG games like Diablo or Deus Ex. And as I grew older, I always wonder why is the first-person MMORPG genre so neglected, especially if the main story is set in a sci-fi environment. And for years now, I've been hearing a ton of good and bad things about a game called Destiny 2, but I never had enough time to check it out. Not gonna lie, the bad things that I've heard about Destiny 2 were really off-putting, so I never really wanted to try it. But I had some time now and I did, and boy I'm glad I did, because with all its flaws and the worst predatory marketing tactics that I have ever seen in a game, Destiny 2 really grew on me. And no, this is not a sponsored video, nobody paid me to make this video. Like, why would they pay a 9,000 subscriber channel for like a review of a game that's like 6 years old? Like, come on. And with that said, you can see this video as a review from a perspective of a new player, as I'm sure that it will be helpful to most new players that want to try the game out. And if you're thinking about playing Destiny 2, but you're still not sure about it, you're in the right place, as this channel was built on the sturdy pillars of truth and honesty. So by the end of the video, you should be informed enough to make that decision. So let's start with the bad, or should I say, let's talk about the story.
Speaking of compliments, you never fail to amaze me, you know that? Everything that's come at us, you're just like, oh, bam, pew, pew, pow. And suddenly whatever's coming at us ain't coming at us anymore.
What the fuck is wrong with your ribs, my man? Now, every good RPG starts out with a good story, and that's exactly where this little review will start. Unfortunately, the story is not compelling at all, and it's all either too complex to lay onto a new player, or it's all just super confusing, which in the end makes it look really bad. The only thing that a new player can understand is that there is a war between the light side and the dark side. It's basically Star Wars, but the swords don't glow. So there's the big-ass planet-looking thing that docked to Earth, and that planet-looking spaceship called the Traveler is the protector of the light, and it's trying to protect the Earth. But somehow it seems that since it came here, it only brought war, death, and misery, and it feels like we're protecting it more than it's protecting us. And then there's the dark side that is led by the Witness, Palpatine. And there is little to no backstory to that guy, girl, fluid gender being, whatever it is. It basically just exists, and it's scary, and it's evil, and it's a badass. But what did it witness? Was it a witness on the Depp versus Hertz trials? Or is Witness its last name? So what's the first name then? I? Question mark? I have so many questions. So you can say that the plot is as basic as it gets. It's an eternal, never-ending fight between the good and the bad. And even though it sounds super weird, after all the shit that we did, somehow humans are on the side of the good. Go figure. But where does your character fit in the whole thing? Well, as always, you start as a nobody. I mean, it's worse than a nobody. You're actually dead. And for some reason, you got rezzed by a flying cube that searched for your body or your soul for a long time. And now it's your ghost or a companion or whatever, but it helps you with everything you do. And since all the rest of the characters seem like they have no personality to them, that flying RoboCube is the only thing that you can actually get attached to, because it's the only thing that has a glimpse of an actual personality, and it speaks on your behalf, even though you have a voice of your own. So I really don't understand why he's almost always the one that talks. But hey, I guess I shouldn't question it that much. And as I've said, during your endeavors, you will be introduced to a ton of new characters, and none of them have an actual personality. And even if they do, it's probably just gonna make you cringe. None of the NPCs have a compelling backstory either. You wouldn't care if they died right after the cutscene. They are basically just mission givers with an ego.
Bam! Pew! Pew! Ow!
And then you have a ton of characters that are on the enemy side that are as shallow as they can get. But it doesn't really matter since your main goal is to kill them, right? But you never seem to actually fight them. You almost always fight their minions. See, I'm not sure because they might be locked behind a paywall. And there's a lot of that, so yeah, strap in, we're gonna talk about that in a second. So it really seems like Bungie pulled the characters and the story out of their asses. And although the story seems complex, I'm pretty sure that the whole story was written the same way that Family Guy's jokes are made according to South Park, by mantis taking idea balls with nouns, verbs, and pop culture references and dropping them into a basket for writers to make a joke out of them. So in short, the storytelling and the writing are simply not that good. Outside of a few main characters, you really have no idea what's going on, who's who, and why some characters are important, if they are important at all. From what I understand, most of the original campaign is not even playable anymore, and the fact that all the story-driven missions and campaigns are all over the place when it comes to the timeline, it just all becomes super confusing to follow, and it makes the story even more irrelevant than it should be in an RPG game. It's not that we need the storytelling to be as linear as possible, it's the fact that the game doesn't really tell you what you need to know so you can follow the story. And all things considered, I can't give the story a bigger score than 4 grumplings out of 10, purely because only the main characters matter, but they don't have a compelling backstory, and the rest of them don't seem to be connected to the main characters that much, because it seems that Bungie made them up just so they can make more campaigns and sell more DLCs, but none of that matters to most people, and I didn't let the story discourage me at all, so I continued playing and I had a great time, because the gameplay is where it's at with this game, but it also has its flaws. Right off the bat, the gunplay is just good. The recoil, the feel, and the sounds of the guns are just amazing. Your abilities are devastating to the enemy, and their visual effects really add to that RPG gameplay that I wanted from a game like this. Straight from the get-go, you really feel like a boss, and the game seems balanced enough so even a new player feels like he's making an impact with his shots and abilities. Compared to other RPG games, the enemies don't really feel like bullet sponges even if you're a low-level noob like I am. Look at you, Starfield. Of course, there are bosses and stronger enemies with larger health pools. But that is to be expected from an RPG game like Destiny 2 is. You have 3 types of weapons. And those 3 are kinetic, energy, and power weapons. The first type are your normal ballistic SMGs, assault rifles, pistols, bows, and weapons like that. The energy weapons are basically the same thing, but from what I understand, they can do more damage to shields. And then you have the power weapons that are gonna be the big damage dealing weapons. They don't have that much ammo, but they pack a punch. Power weapons can be grenade and rocket launchers, heavy machine guns, and swords. Yeah, swords. And like, that's honestly the best part of this game. Like, I'm starting to love the game purely because of the swords, because they're like, they just feel amazing. The mechanics are just great. The servers are just too unstable for a live servers game. Seriously, Bungie, like what the f? Now when the game actually works, mowing down NPCs is fun, and it really reminded me of those good old Doom and Serious Sam games, and the whole gameplay seemed like a combination of those games with an added twist of games such as World of Warcraft or Diablo. The AI is not bad at all. Depending on their class and abilities, they will either run straight at you, flank you, snipe you, look for cover, or even run away from you when they feel like they're defeated. The RPG elements of the game are also really good. After all that loot gathering, not only that you can modify the loot that you're using, but you can also change the perks of your character and the gear that you're using. You can modify your gear as well. And on top of all of that, you can change your looks by changing the color schemes of the gear that you're using. You're also able to craft your weapons and gear, that is, if you're unhappy with the stuff that you got from loot boxes. Basically, you're looking at a real RPG game that has a lot of depth when it comes to customizing your character. Unless you want to customize the face, then like, yeah, well, no, that's not gonna happen. but you can say that the main portion of the gameplay is solid, right? Well, it has its issues. Coming into this game, I really didn't know what to expect, and honestly, hearing about Destiny 2 and Warframe for years, I got one mixed up with the other. Since I love space and spaceships, I thought that this game would have some gameplay with those ships, but I was very wrong. Yes, you can buy spaceships, but they're just there as a replacement for loading screens where you're jumping between planets, so they're basically just cosmetics. I also thought that Destiny 2 is gonna be an open-world MMORPG, but I was wrong. It is a multiplayer game for sure, and you will share your world with some players, but it is in no way an MMO. There is simply not enough players on your servers to call it an MMO. Is that a bad thing? Well, I mean, not really, but it wasn't what I was expecting. On the other hand, I thought it was an open-world game, but it's basically just a series of maps. Although most of them are really nice looking, the whole game feels like it's keeping you on the rails. Even the maps do. Granted, some maps have open-world characteristics to them, but they're too small for me to call Destiny 2 an open-world game. Don't get me wrong, none of this is necessarily a bad thing, but it could impact your decision, as I'm sure that I wasn't the only one expecting to play an open-world MMO game. Now, this game doesn't really want to hold your hand. If anything, it wants you to put your hand up your ass and then on a stove and burn yourself, because that's the only way you will learn anything about this game. Yes, there are tooltips at the beginning, but there's so much stuff happening on your screen for you to look at them. Then you have the tooltips on the loading screens, but they're still not that informative. Just a few examples. In the public events, you never know what you're supposed to do. Sometimes you need to stand in a circle on the ground, but sometimes you can roam around. And I have spent at least an hour of my life trying to figure out how to open some portals in some raiding areas, and I still don't know how to do it. Even the markers are scuffed. Sometimes the game will show you a marker for where you need to go, but most of the times I just felt lost. Until I figured out that there is always a small marker on your radar, but it took me like 8 hours of running around aimlessly to figure that out. Then there's the character creation, and you can choose between 3 specialties, but there is no info on the differences between them. And after a week of playing, I still can't tell you if there are any. Yes, the spells feel a bit different, but they all basically do the same thing. And on top of that, I still have no idea why I started with a power level of 1600. And like, what is the maximum power that I can have on that character? Is it 2000? Is it 10,000? Does the power even matter? How does it affect your character? Is it going to influence the matchmaking in the PvP modes? Or is it just a number that decides if you should or shouldn't enter an area? Is there even a cap on the power levels? I mean, it should be 1800, but I saw some people with like a higher number than that. Like, I don't understand it at all. To progress through your character's levels, you need to do certain missions, but you can't track them manually because the automatic tracking is on, and I have no idea how to disable automatic tracking, because the game didn't tell me how to do it. To unlock level 4, I had to talk to a guy that was on a planet in a church. The game didn't tell me which planet he was on or where he was, and that's the only time I actually went to Google to find that guy. And the funny thing is, I can see that Bungie had this character in another location before, because I found some old info that is obviously outdated, and it told me that he's in a place where he wasn't. So even Googling it and finding the right answer was fucking frustrating. My guess is that you need to research the game on YouTube if you want to play it effectively and progress through it as fast as you can, like an RPG is supposed to be played. On the other hand, I've played Destiny 2 for a week and the game became very repetitive. You go to a spot, you shoot up the place, and you get a reward, which would be fine if there were some different elements to it. But no, that's it. There are no other elements to it. Yes, you have some jumping puzzles, but like, come on, that's the easiest game mechanic to make, and it shouldn't be considered a game mechanic at all. There are also a ton of public events, bounties, and side missions, but they are always the same. You either run around and shoot up the place, or you stand in a spot and shoot up the place. And sometimes you collect some stuff, but like, it's still the same thing. The game also has vehicles for faster transportation and for doing a huge amount of damage to the enemy. Enemy grav-lev bikes are scattered all around the maps, and even though you can spawn one whenever you want to, I had more fun with the enemy grav-levs because they look better and they have guns on them, while the player-owned grav-levs simply don't have any armaments. I have no idea if a player can own one of these. There are also tanks and they play great, they deal a ton of damage damage, but you can only get one in a single mission. And I have yet to discover another mission with a drivable tank. The physics for both the tank and the gravel of bikes feel solid, and it's just a thrill to drive them. So it's confusing to me that there is no racing or tank PvP in this game. Even co-op PvE, where a few of you would be in tanks and the rest of the players would be in other vehicles, would be a blast, but there is no such thing as far as I know. Speaking of PvP, I've heard that it's a major element to this game, and I tried it and I got some kills and I got killed a lot. My guess is that the matchmaking is non-existent, because it was my first time in a PvP match and I had no knowledge of the maps or what my team has to do to win, yet other players seemed like they were much more experienced than I was. And some also looked like they were cheating because they would always pre-fire around corners and one-shot me and my teammates every time we encountered them. And since there is no kill cam, I can't say for sure if they're just that good or if they're cheating. But being a diamond player in Overwatch and a plat player in Rainbow Six Siege, I'm leaning towards them being dirty cheaters. So all in all, the gameplay in this game could easily have been a 9 out of 10, but since it's overly repetitive, and even though there is a ton of untapped potential, there are only 3 game modes: PvE, PvP, and PvPvE or whatever. And yeah, they're all good, but the issue is that I would expect much more from a game like this, especially when most things are locked behind a paywall. And if a DLC costs as much as a new game would, I would expect to see a ton of new mechanics in those DLCs. As an example, with the vehicle physics and movement, I really don't understand why is there no Wipeout style pod racing gameplay, or why we only have a single type of a vehicle that we can own. I assumed that by now there will be a ton of different game modes. It's a 6-year-old game, for crying out loud. So in the end, the best that I can do, because I'm really starting to like the game with all its flaws, I can give Bungie for the gameplay in Destiny 2 7 out of 10 grumplings. And it's simply because it's way too repetitive, there is a lot of untapped potential, and the fact that the most things are locked behind a paywall simply don't help the game out. Speaking of that, let's talk about the monetization. It's bad.
$100 bills.
Coming into this game, I knew that it's a free-to-play game, but that you can't progress past level 6 with your characters unless you paid for some DLCs. And I was okay with that. I saw it as a free-to-try-out kind of a game, and I was cool with that kind of a deal. I thought that you will mostly spend your money on cosmetics, and when you buy DLCs, they will basically be a game within a game. They will add a ton of new gameplay elements. But man, I was wrong. Yes, there are cosmetics. In fact, there is a metric shit ton of them. And yes, there are DLCs. But they really don't add that much to the game. After liking the game enough, I wanted to check out the 2 newest DLCs, so I've spent around $70, which would be around the same amount of money that a new game would cost, and all I can tell you is that I made a grave mistake. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm hoping that this video will make enough money so I can cover those expenses. Even though I bought the Witch Queen expansion, I can't access the Witch Queen's dungeon, because I didn't pay for it. And I even found an NPC that is basically a loot goblin, and he has a ton of loot boxes. But you can't open 99% of the crates unless you bought the 30th anniversary pack, which is $30. I can't even get all the gear that I could from finishing the missions until I buy the Legacy Collection for $60, or some of the other DLCs that cost just as much. I thought it's gonna be a free-to-try, pay-to-play game, but damn does it want you to spend a lot of money on it. Not only that you can't progress, but you also can't access areas that you haven't paid for, even though you did, but you haven't bought the key for the fucking dungeon. Then you have DLCs with similar names, and I was super confused that I can't access an area that should be in the DLC that I bought, but the area was from the Beyond Light expansion, and I bought the Lightfall or whatever it's called, the other expansion, which is also confusing for a new player. And then on top of that, you can buy an annual pass, and I have no idea what it does, but it costs money, of course. And when you combine all the prices of all the DLCs without paying for cosmetics and stuff like that, you get to around $400, which isn't like that bad compared to some other games, but honestly, I simply don't see the reasoning behind this. You simply don't get enough content out of the DLCs for $400 fucking dollars. So all in all, it's not the worst game, but it's most certainly up there with the worst of them. So for the monetization, I will give them 2 out of 10 grumplings, because Bungie is not as greedy as that one developer developer of a game that I played for years. This video is sponsored by Star Citizen. If you love spending a ton of money and getting almost nothing in return, in fact, if you like spending thousands of dollars on JPEGs while waiting for those JPEGs to be actual assets that you can use, or if you just like spending money on armor that you will lose upon death, look no further than Star Citizen. Of course, Star Citizen is not sponsoring this video. They like taking money, not giving it away. Now, before we end this little review of mine, let's talk about the graphics, the sound design, and the music. The graphics are good, but they're not that great, even compared to the games from the same time. It got released a year prior to Red Dead Redemption 2, and it's a constantly updated live service game. Yet it looks a bit worse than Red Dead Redemption 2. The graphics are actually much crispier and better if you turn HDR on, but since I couldn't get my OBS to work with HDR, I can't really show you how great it can look with HDR on. And on top of that, I have 18 hours of unusable footage because I forgot to check the recordings. Although the environments are very aesthetically pleasing, the animations and the facial expressions of the NPCs just aren't. They are as bad as Starfield's characters are, which says a lot about Starfield, doesn't it? The cutscenes look great, but they're obviously pre-rendered, and probably not even made in the engine itself. So when it comes to graphics, I'll give them a 6 out of 10, because they're not the worst, but not the best either. Sound design and the music are good. The weapons, explosions, and the mobs really sound like you're there experiencing it. And since it's a sci-fi title, I can't really judge on how realistic they are. All that I can say is that they're immersive and you really feel like you're on the battlefield. The music, on the other hand, is not that good. It's aggressive and loud orchestral music for the most part, and it constantly sounds like it's a cheap Chinese copy of the trailer music for one of the Avenger movies. There are no memorable themes or melodies. It's all there just to make everything feel pompous and grand and to make your blood flowing, but often it just sounds too aggressive and annoying. So when it comes to the music and sound effects, I can give them a solid 7 out of 10 grumplings, and that's me being generous, since the music can get really annoying, at least to me, since I'm a composer, a sound engineer, and a sound designer by trade. So I told you about the bad and I told you about the good, but what is my final verdict for this game? Well, I'm actually torn with this one. I want to give Destiny 2 a score of 7 out of 10 grumplings, because my opinion is the only one that matters, and grumplings are the new standard of game reviews, right? But the issue is that I'm not seeing that much replayability to it. When it comes to PvP, I'd rather play Overwatch 2 with its toxic-ass community and all of its issues, but I would choose Overwatch over Destiny 2 every single time. When it comes to PvE, I really like it, but it becomes very repetitive, and I don't see myself investing that much time into it. It feels like it's a game that will catch the new players but completely neglect the seasoned player base that simply want more out of it. Maybe I didn't play it enough, and I may have bought the wrong DLCs, so I didn't see where this game truly shines. If so, that's not my problem, it's an issue of the game not telling me what I should do. Or maybe it's all about having the best armor and the best stats and looking good so other players can look at you like you're a god, but I'm not that kind of a person. So you can see it basically as one of those games that you come back to from time to time and play it with your friends, for sure. But the issue is that most of the things are locked behind a paywall, and the DLCs really don't offer that much. It feels like when you buy an expansion you get a few weapons and armor pieces and a couple of maps in the new campaign, and that's it. And honestly, that is not enough, at least for me, because it simply does not justify the price. So my final score is 6 out of 10 grumplings, because I really like some of the core mechanics of the game, but I hate companies being as greedy as Bungie is with this one. It would be a higher score if the servers were stable and if the marketing department would tone it down a bit. And if you like the video, you can like and you can subscribe and you can comment, and you can also like bash on me because I got something wrong and all of that. Yeah, there's the comment section for that. Sure, I'll go for it. And I gotta thank my patrons, because those guys are awesome. Like, they are basically the people that are sponsoring this video. And if you want to become a patron, there's like a link, or like a YouTube member, there are links down in the description and on the side. Like, you know how YouTube works. But yeah, love you all, thank you for watching, and